Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending the Brockus Blum Computer Consulting, monthly webinar series. Just a heads up, we are recording this. This will be on our YouTube channel, and it will be posted on our website towards the end of this week. Also, if you have any questions during the webinar, there is a question Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type anything in there. If it's pertinent to the conversation, we'll try to interrupt. Otherwise, we'll hold all questions to the end. And with that, my name is Kelly Bergman, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to Lawrence. Oh, can you say it for me? I already. Cruciano.
Fantastic.
Excellent. He's the president of Corp Infotech and a CMMC registered advanced practitioner. He also holds numerous ANSI recognized risk assessment and management certificates. And in his free time, he has authored over 200 cyber risk programs and implemented a similar number. A little background on Corp Infotech. They're a registered provider organization. They have a background in regulated industries ranging from financial services to DoD and DOE, and they provide a range of services from co-managed IT and next-gen threat detection and response through risk assessment using standard framework. That's a lot. So I'm going to let you take it over, Lawrence, and thank you again for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting this, and for everyone that took time out to join us in talking about something that I think is a very important topic. We have a lot of information that is packed in this. So before we get started, I will go ahead and say there are numerous QR codes and direct links in the slide deck. So that you can, in your free time or after you have consumed this and just had the opportunity to percolate, that you can go back and reference this. I've also included a couple of opportunities in this presentation for you to reach out to me directly if you have any questions on this, because this is a incredibly information dense topic. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started here? And for that, I'll give you just a very high level bit of information about me. I've been doing this type of work for about 25 years. I hate to say that out loud now, but it is true. My focus is on whole ecosystem risk, and I have a unique perspective in that because of my background in the managed services and managed security business, having founded and started those organizations. I had the privilege of working in enterprise, in defense, in energy, and lots of regulated organizations in between over the years, and so I have kind of a unique view on what it takes to stand up and run an IT organization from a cyber perspective. Not just in terms of what's on paper, but actually making it happen and delivering that to the stakeholders through the business and effectively being effective at that's a double word, but being effective at delivering an outcome to the business. To Kelly's point, I am a CMMC registered advanced practitioner. We as an organization are a RPO, a registered practitioner organization, and with that really effectively means that we have some formal training, education, experience, and have passed the requirements of the Cyber AB, who is a regulatory body for the CMMC certification. So we do come to this from a position of experience. But you're not here to talk about me or hear about me and all of the stuff. So let's get into our agenda. I thought today would be worthwhile to start with understanding what is CMMC. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what CMMC and kind of why it exists. We're going to talk about the little bit of the history, kind of setting the stage for CMMC of what brought us to this point. I think understanding where we started, like where the DoD started, is a really important point to understand what their intentions are, and we can kind of anticipate what the outcome is, what their objective is in this program. This is not just a history lesson or an education. It's really focused to empower you with some tools and some perspectives to start this process. So taking the first step on that journey. And even if you're in the middle of this, I hope that you'll be able to take some things away that you are just haven't considered, or gain some nuggets of wisdom and insight here. I do have a number of tools that are included both in the deck, but for time purposes, I have a number that are linked externally, and so that they're available to you. And then I'm going to encourage some things to take action, for you to take action and actually deliver something out of this for the investment in your time. So with that, and before we get started, I think that this quote from General Colin Powell probably best summarizes the CMMC process, the journey, and that really that there are no secrets to success. The outcome is the result of the preparation, the hard work, and learning from failure. And that summarizes CMMC so well, at least to me, because there is a huge amount of preparation. There is a lot of hard work. There's a lot of technical work, but CMMC is bigger than the systems that have wires hanging out of the back of them and blinking lights blinking on them. It is a whole business challenge. And I think General Powell really typified this in the statement, which, by the way, had nothing to do with CMMC, but it's so true. So with that, let's talk about a little bit about what is CMMC. Now, I'm sure that in your journey, if you've made it to this point and you're on this call, you have without fail heard CMMC. 2 years ago, you could Google CMMC and you'd be lucky if you had a couple of hits. Today, you Google CMMC and there's an entire page of sponsored ads. And I would challenge it, probably almost every one of those have something a little bit different, a little slight angle to CMMC and possibly different information. All of the information that I'm sharing here, I am providing links back to the authoritative regulation and sources. So that information, I would encourage you to reference and look at the original sources of this, because they, again, the government, I think, has done a very good job of making this information dense. So what is CMMC? Effectively, at its core, it is a tiered set of controls that are intended to safeguard sensitive contract and other defense-related information. These controls aren't new. They've been around for a while, actually going back to like 2016, 2017, deriving from NIST Special Publication 800-171. But today, we're going to be focusing on the current standard, and that is CMMC 2.0. CMMC 2.0 is the 3-tier model that you see on the right-hand side here. The legacy 5-tier model, CMMC 1.0, has been deprecated. It is not a thing anymore. It won't ever be applied. It's CMMC 2.0. That is what we need to focus on. So CMMC 2.0 is, again, 3 tiers ranging from level 1 to level 3, and that are increasing in the level of complexity and thoroughness of the controls that they prescribe. CMMC is organized into 14 cybersecurity domains. Now, I know not everyone's a cybersecurity geek like I am. So what is a domain? It's simply a distinct set of practices with similar attributes, things that are related. The CMMC 2.0 model and those 14 cybersecurity domains, they are whole business encompassing. They do not just focus on things with blinking lights on them. This is often, and it's an unfortunate stereotype that CMMC has gotten, that this is a technical problem, that this is a technical thing that needs to be solved. It is not a technical thing. It has technical components, but several of these domains are business related. They range from access control, which is physical security, guards and gates and locks and logs, all the way to audit and accountability, how things are recorded, how the business performs record keeping, personnel security, even down to physical labeling. So inside of these 14 domains, yes, there's lots of technical stuff with lots of IT jargon in there, but it is a whole business problem. And that's one of the first misconceptions that I want to put out there and try to eliminate is this is not just an IT thing. So the CMMC model really is focused on this tiered set of tiered set of controls. And the intention of those controls is to protect American ingenuity and national security information. I'm going to read the pillars, the 5 pillars of the CMMC program as stated by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. And normally I don't like reading things just rotely because right, I don't personally take a lot of gain a lot out of it, but I think the words here are very intentional. And we're going to come back to a couple of these a little bit later in the presentation. And so the 5 primary goals of the CMMC program, as per the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, are to safeguard sensitive information and to enable and to protect the warfighter, to dynamically enhance the cybersecurity posture of the defense industrial base, to meet evolving threats, to ensure accountability while minimizing barriers to compliance with DoD requirements, to contribute towards instilling a collaborative culture of cybersecurity and cyber resilience, and to maintain public trust through high professional and ethical standards. Now, of those 5 pillars, I'm going to underscore and highlight, and I'm asking you to kind of hold one in your memory here, and that is the word dynamically. So dynamically enhance the defense industrial base cybersecurity to meet the evolving threats. The dynamicity of this program is something that I think is often lost, but those pillars really do underscore the intentions of the program. And you're going to hear me say a lot in this presentation that it's important for us to understand the intentions so that we can better deliver on the outcomes. All right, now, as with all these government, we have to have some acronym soup. So the first acronym soup here are FCI and CUI. And again, this is an information risk-centric framework, information-centric risk certification, going from level 1 to level 3. At level 1 is focused on FCI, or federal contract information, effectively non-public information that is generated or provided by the government. Often this is financial. But moving up into levels 2 and level 3, this is where CUI, or controlled unclassified information, comes into play. Now, that's also information that is generated by or created for the government and has some national security implication to that. We're going to talk a little more about that in a moment. The important thing here to understand at this point is that the CMMC, these 3 levels of the CMMC certification are really bifurcated between FCI and CUI. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's an increasingly complex set of standards. Fortunately, we have been given, as with most things in the government, we have been given copious amounts of data around this. This has been codified so well. At level 1, there are 17 practices that are effectively required for all federal contractors. And that is commonly called the FAR. Specifically 48 CFR 204-21, and those 17 practices that are identified there at level 1 are universal for all contractors. But moving into levels 2 and 3, and this is really where the meat of this presentation is going to be focused, is on those organizations that are subject to levels 2 and 3 and have possession of CUI. And there are 110 controls beginning at level 2 that are spelled out by NIST 800-171, and then at level 3, 130 controls, which are spelled out by NIST 800-172. So again, remembering that CMMC is really an information risk-centric set of standards and controls is going to be very important because it's all about what the risk is to the organization based on the information that you have. Now, to put all of these references in one place, if you're going to grab a screenshot or references later, that's what this slide is. All the references are here. You can go back and reference the scripture and verse and what these requirements are. So, summarizing what is CMMC. Fundamentally, CMMC is a dynamic set of standards that intends to secure the DoD's supply chain from the largest prime contractor all the way down to the smallest subcontractor. It's a dynamic set of requirements, meaning they are going to change over time, and that they are risk sized, meaning that it's not one size fits all. It's not equally applied across the Lockheeds and the Boeings of the world, all the way down to the smallest subcontractors. These are risk sized information-based sets of controls. And probably most importantly here is it brings all of these things for FCI and CUI under a single standard. Rather than having things different for interior or energy, it's one set of standards, and we're seeing an increasing number of non-DoD parts of the government that are looking to CMMC and aligning themselves with that for their own compliance. So understanding kind of what CMMC is, I think we now let's move into talking about where it came from and why the DoD felt that it was required. Now, for that, we have to kind of go back in the Wayback Machine, all the way back to 2010. And if you can think back to what 2010 was like, right, that was a long time ago. The world was fundamentally a different place. Cybersecurity was surely a different place. I would argue that the popular news cycle didn't commonly have headlines that were more anchored to cybersecurity events. We weren't talking about ChatGPT and AI taking over the world, except for in maybe some far off sci-fi. But cybersecurity was still very much a thing. And the DoD saw that there were an increasing number of attacks and frankly, information leakage through industrial espionage inside of their supply chain. And so to combat that, they started the practice of issuing unclassified cyber advisories, sending out to their primes and to subcontractors. The government was quite surprised that private for-profit businesses didn't take these possibly outside chances or low-risk cyber advisories with the same level of severity that the military did. They were really surprised at this. And so they were sharing this information and they weren't seeing the uptake in action by the private sector. Well, they tried a few fits and starts, and finally in 2016, they shifted this. There was still a problem, and they shifted the focus from the technical and the technical people into the business office. And they did that through the FAR, through the rules for buying products and services, and specifically in 2016 with the introduction of DFARS 252, 204, 7012. And so they introduced the idea of a contractual obligation that defined adequate security, and they put that in place, and they had set the original target of the end of 2017 for its deployment. And that was codified around NIST 800-171. We heard that one earlier. CMMC level 2 and the controls spelled out by NIST 800-171 have been contractual obligations for all federal contractors that were subject to that code in DFARS back to 2017. So these aren't new. Well, they introduced that. They introduced a mechanism to centrally codify and quantify risk, and that was the Supplier Performance Risk System, or the SPRS, SPRS system. That's the common 110 score that you may hear. They introduced that back in 2016, 2017, and they were still seeing cyber attacks, right? Like they had all these suppliers that are now reporting their scores in the SPRS system. They had codified that this is now a contractual obligation. We're taking cybersecurity seriously. You have to do the things that are stated in NIST 800-171. Everyone was saying, we're doing these things. We're good. We have a SPRS score of 110. Perfect. In fact, in 2018, the Office of the DoD's CIO evaluated the feasibility of what we now know as CMMC 1.0 by looking at the SPRS scores of particularly small businesses. And so they looked at organizations that were reporting in SPRS that had fewer than 500 employees and less than $100 million in revenue. And they said, how many of those organizations are reporting a score of 110? Now, you may not find this surprising. I found it a little bit surprising, but the statistic was that 74% of small businesses registered in SPRS were reporting a perfect score. So the Office of the DoD CIO said, hey, like, this is easy. Like all of these businesses are doing this. The smallest, most vulnerable businesses are still doing this. So this idea of CMMC, of codifying and standardizing and requiring an audit, well, that's viable because the vast majority were successful with this. So that brought us to 2019. And that was the introduction of CMMC 1.0. Now, the DoD rolled this out, had a 5-year rollout period, so that through contract year 2025. And again, remember, they looked to the SPRS system, they looked to the compliance data that they had, and it turned out that it looked like it was really viable. But now all of a sudden, there's a requirement for an audit, a third party to come in and audit your practices. The DoD was trying to patch the holes inside of their information ecosystem. And they couldn't figure out where they were coming from because, again, 74% of the businesses there were, well, they were compliant with that 800-171 requirement. Well, they released CMMC 1.0, required the standard through 2025 for that rollout period, had a requirement for an audit. And I think we all know how that ended. Not well. There was an incredible pushback, blowback from the defense industrial base, specifically around like, this isn't possible. We can't do this. And it turns out that it was an audit requirement that really threw everyone off. And so the DoD went away. They have looked at all of these, the way the information ecosystem is. They went to lots of partners, and they came out with now in November of 2021 CMMC 2.0, and that brings us to where we are today. The revised CMMC 2.0 program, with its 3 tiers, that is representative of what is in force, what is in effect, and what is still coming through contract year 2025. So I want to just take a pause for a second here, because I think it's important to underscore 2 points here. One, that the DoD has been trying to patch the holes in their ecosystem for a while. I mean, again, going back to 2010, they've been trying to find ways to solve this problem. They've tried it technically, they've tried it contractually and administratively. Now they're doing it through audit. It is an understood issue at the highest levels of the DoD. And they have spent a lot of money in quantifying this and measuring this. And I think this next set of data, I think, really underscores this in a pretty meaningful way. Now, cyber attacks against the DIB, against the defense industrial base, have increased about 833% between 2018 and 2021. The statistics on that are muddy. This is a conservative estimate. So understanding that in the private sector, attacks against the DIB have increased 833% in that period. And let's look at federal cybersecurity spend. Now, I'm looking at really the 4 most attacked departments here: DOE, Treasury, Transportation, and an aggregate roll-up of Homeland Security that covers all of the others through their CISA, the Cybersecurity Agency. On average, they're seeing an increase of 9.8% per year compounded annual growth in their cybersecurity spend on the federal level. They're trying to keep up with the threats. So if we use that data, and again, keep in mind 9.8, that's the number. If we look on the private sector across the most attacked industry sectors, financial services, as you might expect, financial services sees the largest increase in volume of attacks. Looking at those organizations based on some data that Deloitte put out, they're increasing at about 0.9% on their cybersecurity spend. So again, 833% increase against the DIB for cybersecurity attacks. The most attacked private industry sector, being financial services, is only increasing their cybersecurity spend at about 0.9%. And the federal government is increasing theirs at 9.8%. So a 10x increase, or 10x delta, between the most attacked private sector and the government. So clearly, right, the distribution of cybersecurity capabilities here is radically different. You know, I think that it's unfortunately very often that these smaller organizations are those that are the most at risk here. the government really tried to capture and quantify and analyze this in a couple of different ways. And this is something I would encourage everyone to read. This is a RAND study. It's a research report that is linked here on screen. And I do have, again, I have these links that you can reference outside of this. But this is a quote from that study. And in this 2019 study, they were looking at the overall cybersecurity posture of the defense industrial base, and they found that small defense-related firms were deficient in 6 out of 6 key cybersecurity domains. Not the 14 of the CMMC, but of 6 identified kind of key functions that smaller organizations, those with less than $100 million in annual revenue, were deficient in 6 out of 6. Now, I want to put this in a visual because I think it really illustrates this point. This is the DIB. This is the DIB at the end of 2021. And we have 2022 estimates in here that are superimposed, but consider that the very top, the green, right? Those are the big guys. Those are the Lockheeds, those are the Boeing. Those are organizations with more than 500 million in revenue. And then moving into the red, there are about 203 firms there that have between 100 million and 500 million in revenue. And then the rest of that are organizations that have less than $100 million in revenue. That is about 99% of the DIB. It is an incredible number. Incredible. So understanding that the defense industrial base is principally comprised of smaller organizations, that we have multiple expert studies that have quantified that those organizations are not keeping up with the spend that the government is, that they are deficient generally across the board in the required cybersecurity functions, and that those organizations are at the highest risk for some type of catastrophic event. I think all of that has to be understood to say that this is an understood problem and has set the stage for where we are today, why the government is taking these actions. And in her congressional appointment, Dr. Kathleen Hicks, who is the Deputy Defense Secretary, said this quote. She and at the highest levels understand this is a problem. And I think that it is really important to underscore that it is really the theft of intellectual property and American know-how and ingenuity that is what they're trying to close the gap with here. So it is not just because they want to have some new technical regulation. It is because that there is a wholesale theft and loss of American ingenuity and know-how that is principally coming from smaller organizations. So with that said, and understanding that, I wanted to now look toward CMMC, toward the journey, thinking on principally organizations that are smaller in nature, less than $100 million in revenue, and those that are really focused on doing business with the government, but specifically doing business with the government at CMMC levels 2 or level 3. And there's one thing that I think is important to understand as we go and look toward this journey, and that is that the entire CMMC process is built around the concept of being able to prove what you're saying. Like you can prove your security posture to any stakeholder at any time. That is an ecosystem stakeholder, so it could be a third-party business partner, it could be a customer, it could be a sales prospect, it could be an auditor, it could be the DoD itself. But having one place to memorialize all of the policies, procedures, the standards, all of the things to prove what your posture is something that I think it's an underpinning element of this entire CMMC journey that I don't think can be minimized. We really need to highlight that. So with that said, let's look toward the journey towards CMMC. Now, in trying to keep this simple, I wanted to kind of express the relative distribution of information between CMMC levels 1 through level 3 and beyond. Now you notice that the purple in this circle is ITAR. That's export control. That's some of that secret squirrel stuff that really, really sensitive information. Still not necessarily classified, but highly export controlled. I'm going to leave outside the scope of our conversation because it is something different. But generally with a relative distribution of the information inside of the DIB, inside of CMMC levels 1 through 3, going from FCI, which is applicable for all federal contractors, into CUI, and then CDI, which is covered defense information. So again, highly specialized national security type stuff. That's down there at level 3 and beyond. Understanding that focusing on levels 2 and 3 here in our journey, the first step of that is really to begin with the end in mind. And we'll dive into each of these a little further, but understanding what is it that the business intends to do, what information is the business going to have, where is it going to be? So then moving into clearly defining and articulating the scope, where is the information, who has the information, who's going to influence that information. And a pro tip here, that doesn't necessarily mean that it stops at the edge of the 4 walls of the organization. That is the entirety of your ecosystem. Third parties, cloud, managed service providers, etc. And then lastly, measure, mind, and net. This cycle effectively is our total quality management cycle, but a constant closing of the gap. So with that, let's jump into this, understanding that CMMC is again not one size fits all. It is a risk-sized set of it's a risk-sized standard that's based on what information that you as an organization is going to have. So for that, the very first thing to do is to start by defining what your security plan is. Now, again, it has to be acronym soup, right? A little bit of acronym soup here. SSP is the system security plan, and SAQ is a self-assessment questionnaire. We've already talked about SPURS, right? The government's central portal to collect and manage, monitor, and audit or measure, monitor the compliance and overall risk posture of their suppliers. So beginning with an SSP, and that is a fairly simple document that is really focused on defining who in the business is responsible. A lot of this is just writing it down, but who in the business is responsible for cybersecurity? Who are the key business systems owners in the organization? As an example, who is it that's responsible for your ERP? Who is it that's responsible for the MRP? Who is responsible for CRM functions? Who owns those information silos? And what type of information are they going to contain? Also getting a charter from the executive leadership of the organization around what kind of information, what kind of contracts are we going to pursue. So capturing all of that on a form and then starting the process of going through a self-assessment questionnaire, I would generally focus on NIST 800-171 as that questionnaire of, are we doing these things? And I can't encourage strongly enough, be honest with yourself. Be really brutally honest with yourself. Are you doing the things that are required based on those controls? And I mean, right, let's face it, most organizations, many organizations, not most, many companies have in the past just reported 110 score to SPURS and they went on with their day. Well, now that's not really possible. Right, there is going to be an audit. There is going to be a necessity for a third party to evaluate what you're doing and how you're doing it. So when you're early in this continuum at that SAQ phase, being really brutally honest and identifying the gaps before you get to submitting a score in SPURS, it really makes it much, much easier. The objective that I would encourage you to focus on early in this process is to close this loop between a delta in SPURS that's not 110 and the controls that you've identified, right? Go through this loop. Don't eat the elephant in one bite. It is going to take a lot of passes at this. So keep whittling down those gaps that are standing in the way of 110 score. Now, the link that is highlighted in yellow here is a link to the Cyber AV, the CMMC accreditation body, and the current in rulemaking draft process for the CMMC assessment process. The reason I'm including that here is I think understanding exactly what the way an assessor is going to approach your SSP, approach the controls that you have, approach in the mindset of how are they going to test, what are they going to look for. It's important to understand. Again, thinking at knowing the end and keeping the end in mind at the beginning here. I've also included a link out in to our blog and a great link, information dense page over on the Office of Undersecretary of Defense page there in the bottom. Again, there'll be QR codes with all this later on, and you can of course get the slide. Now, the pre-decisional assessment process that's linked here, that helps you get into the mind of an assessor before you ever get into the assessment process. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we kind of continue down this journey. So moving on, understanding the scope, really understanding the scope is so important. What level of CMMC are you going to be required to comply with? Is it just a level 1 in FCI, or is it going to be CUI or something more? There's so much misinformation out there today about what is CUI and what is not. The link that I provided on the page is a link back to the National Archives, who is the clearinghouse for the definitions of all things CUI. There's a training link that's linked here, but there are copious amounts of information that are out there that define what is and is not CUI. Understand that in your scope. Make sure that the business understands that. And so again, focusing principally on levels 2 and 3 here, begin to start capturing all the silos and clouds that your information assets live in. This seems so simple, right? It seems so simple, and I'm going to emphasize the word cloud there because that is, right, that's a formal definition now. And so how does the information come into the organization? Who sees it? Where is it stored? What system is it processed on? And then where does it go after that? Documenting a business information flow, understanding where does it sit inside of the ERP or MRP of the organization, what information is there, and who has access to it. This is what is intended in this step, really understanding that. And then once you have that, once you have, what information you have, who is responsible for the systems, and where all that data is, that's when you can start forming the gap. One of the things that I think I will underscore here is I've seen is that many people never define a information system owner. They'll say like, hey, we have an MRP system and IT is responsible for that. Or we use Salesforce and IT is responsible for that. My advocation is that you identify someone who isn't necessarily in IT. That is another individual who's responsible for the function of those systems, at least in terms of the technical information that they store, how people are approved and authorized to use those, what the different roles and access rights are, and really defining the in-application information flow. I'm a big advocate of defining those people, and that IT can be responsible for the infrastructure, for the plumbing, for the network technology, all of the things that support that application, but really knowing the intricacies of that. At least in my experience, I found that it is usually a different business function that has that expertise. But regardless if it's a different business function or it's an IT, identifying an information system owner for each of those silos and each of those clouds is important as we move forward and try to close the gap against the controls. All right, and last point here in this journey at a high level is really to measure, mind, and mend. Once we have identified that gap, we feel like we've identified that gap, and we can start closing and fixing the problems that are there. Once you have gotten your SAQ, your self-assessment questionnaire, where you really feel you identified it, you've documented these things, your SAQ says we have 110 score, we're in a really good place. At that point, I encourage you to now engage your assessment partner, the C3 PAL. Again, we love acronym soup, but this is the formal assessment entity that will do the certification of your organization. The selection of a C3 PAL is such a critical part of this process. There are C3 PALs that understand AS9100, they understand ISO, they understand lots of other different frameworks. They understand some that are highly specialized in one industry or another, but they also have experience and certification capability inside of CMMC. Aligning yourself with someone who understands your industry and other certifications like ISO, as an example, that you already have, and understanding where the control overlaps and reciprocity lie is so important. It makes this job, this whole process, just that much easier. So getting a good alignment there, and then engaging that C3 PAL, but not doing that until you've really done your internal work with the SSP, with the SAQ, and closing the gap with what we believe you really have a true 110 score internally. But that brings us to the assessment process. And so now the actual process of the assessment is a little bit outside of the scope of this conversation, just for deference of time, but that assessment process that I linked in an earlier slide will give you full insight to that. So I would encourage you to review that before you get here. But in the assessment, that assessment team will generally evaluate your processes, your technology configuration, the documentation, all of the things that are controlled or that are in scope inside of either level 2 or level 3. Complete that assessment, and they will land, those deltas will land on a POAM, or plan of action and milestones. Now, the POAM are the things that determine what needs to be done to meet the deltas, meet the gap, to reach certification. That is a very, very specific list of who's responsible for it, what the work effort approximately is to complete that, what the timeline to complete that is, and when. Like, who's responsible to deliver this thing by when. Once all the POAM items have been completed, that's it. The assessment is completed, and you now have a CMMC assessment. And that process, and it's you know, and kind of the high level seems very simple, but there's lots and lots of intricacies that are along the way. Zooming back to the point of keeping the end in mind, and really measure mind and men. Those two, I think, are probably the most important pieces to keep in focus as you go through this journey. Now, I don't want to leave with a bunch of high level theoretical stuff. So we're going to start talking about some tactics here, and being more specific. Now, I'm the proud father of young children, in exposure to the CMMC process and CUI. One thing came to mind, and these are my words, and that is that CUI follows the toddler's rules of possession. If you're not familiar with them, they're on screen. But CUI simply is the information is the DoD's. It's not any of ours. It is the DoD's. We are merely custodians of it for some period of time. CMMC and that standard does very little for other information assets in the organization. It is focused on safeguarding that information. It's not safeguarding the whole business. It's not minimizing cyber risk across the whole business. It is about protecting the DoD's information. Now, the side effect often is that you have the overall cybersecurity posture of the organization does increase, but by and large, it's important to keep in mind here that CUI is the DoD's and CMMC is there to protect it and safeguard. The concept of a continuous security perimeter, I mentioned that earlier, but that is so important because it doesn't, that safeguarding that information does not stop at your doorstep. It extends into your MSPs, into your CSPs, into your subcontractors, all the way through your ecosystem. Anyone that you allow to have access to see or influence that information, that is CUI, they're in scope. So with that said, just to illustrate this, to be really, really clear, CMMC hardens the CUI and FCI silos. It doesn't harden financial services or your financial systems. It doesn't safeguard or harden anything in the manufacturing environment or any of the other really important stuff that the organization has. It may not necessarily mitigate the broad cyber risk that you have. It might, but oftentimes it doesn't, and it's not a panacea. You need other things, other supporting frameworks, other supporting controls, really to support your CMMC security program. So as we look to be more practical in this information, the 3 Ps are what I would encourage you to think about as you are saying, all right, we're endeavoring to pursue CMMC. We know we need to safeguard this information. We want to improve our cybersecurity posture, and we know that we need to centrally manage and centrally locate all of the compliance information to be able to prove what we're doing, say what we do, and do what we say. And that the 3 Ps are policy, practice, and proof. So very important to keep this in mind. So as we look toward that and keeping those 3 Ps in mind, understanding that this path towards CMMC certification, it is a journey. You need a map for that, and those are your policies, your procedures, your core sets of documentation. The traveling companions that we have along the way here, those third parties, the MSPs, the clouds, the third-party subcontractors, all of those matter. They can very easily be in scope, and we're going to talk about what makes them in scope and what not and what doesn't in a moment. But those traveling companions count, and you need to be able to adapt to the fact that things change. The CMMC standard will change, but I don't know any businesses that are really static in this day and age. They're dynamic, especially smaller organizations. I mean, that is what makes small business so amazing, is that their ability to bob and weave and adapt, and they're so agile. So understanding that there is oftentimes need for continuous micro assessment or reassessment around small changes inside of individual containers or individual systems, that matters. The same thing also matters in what clouds that you choose to use. There are so many cloud providers that are out there. I'm pretty sure there's a cloud service for just about everything today. And you know, if a cloud provider suddenly, you know, now they're doing something different for the organization, they're storing some other information or processing something, well, you have to be able to be agile to understand that our CMMC requirements are maybe affected by that. They may now go from out of scope to in scope. So being able to be agile is very important along this process. Don't just set a point on the horizon and go for it. Really set a point on the horizon, understand there's a million little steps to get there. And sometimes you may need to take a step back to make a step forward. Don't take shortcuts. This is, I know you probably hear this all the time, but don't take shortcuts. The benefits here are great, right? There's amazing business from the government that and by all accounts is expected to increase, but the penalties, specifically those under the False Claims Act, which the government is actively soliciting whistleblowers for, those penalties are severe and don't make it worthwhile. So don't take shortcuts. When you are pursuing this or considering what changes, what controls you're going to implement, if you have questions around specific things, right, there are thousands of people just like myself that are out there that we're here to answer those questions before an assessment, before you get into the throes of things. That's why there are thousands of us that are registered practitioners and RPOs like this organization, that we're here to help you answer those questions so that you don't take chances and you don't take shortcuts, and help you not to. The DoD has had a number of opportunities since CMMC 1 to roll back or kind of kick this 5-year rollout timeframe out. They haven't. I used to say that there were a lot of CMMC deniers that are out there. I think that number is dwindled a lot. The DoD continues to say that all contracts are going to have CMMC provisions by fiscal 2026. They're saying that, they're reinforcing that. It's happened numerous times, even over the course of the last quarter, where they had the chance to back it off and they haven't. So keep that in mind, that this isn't just going to go away. All right, as we start looking toward being even more tactical on this, here are a couple of tools to kind of help along the way. And I know we're getting close to our time, so this is going to go pretty quickly here. I would encourage, if you have any questions or want to dive into any of these any further, they're available offline. Be also always can reach out to me privately. I'm happy to take questions on it. So first, especially for smaller organizations, there are lots of free and very low cost tools available. You don't have to pay a lot of money. I mentioned earlier in this program that 2 years ago you could Google CMMC and you'd be lucky if you get a couple of hits. Today, that's not the case. This is anticipated to be big business, and there's lots of ways to spend money. There's lots of easy ways to spend money, but there are many, many free tools that exist. One of the best information dense websites is that of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, OUSD. That's what this QR code will link you out to, and it is a level 1 self-assessment scope. They have a level 1 and a level 2 self-assessment scope available on the website, and they're really quite good, going back to that SAQ. The other point is the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, PTACs. Google it for your state. These are organizations that are there and funded by the SBA and DoD to help with these kind of things. There are incredible resources, not all of them available on the web, but there are incredible resources that I have seen from multiple PTACs that are effectively paint by numbers for specific industries looking to pursue CMMC certification. But again, there are lots of free tools out there, so don't think that you have to spend a lot of money to start this process. You definitely don't. For those that are in the DIB today that are cleared, that have some type of either confidential or a highly sensitive national security information, the DoD Cybercrime Center is a resource that you can access. There are free and openly accessible elements of this that are available for all, not just cleared contractors, but the threat intel and malware taxonomy that they provide for cleared contractors is exceptional. The reason I say something so technical here, one is the audience that we're talking to here, but second, if you understand what the threats are, what is it like, who are the threat actors that actually are targeting the DoD and the DIB, this is the place to go. Incredible information, and really gets you to be able to think in terms of the attacker. All right, had to include this in here. This is a hot topic. We could probably have an hour-long webinar on this one point alone, and that is, what do I need to do with O365, with my Microsoft 365 and Azure tenant? I hear that if I'm CMMC, I have to have GCC high, or I don't need GCC. I can just do it with commercial. This is an authoritative document linked in the QR code from Microsoft. This is the official guidance from Microsoft that has made it through the DoD CIO, and so you can figure out on the left where you fit and what you need on the right. I would encourage you to reference this, because this is what I call a FUD buster, a fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Now, one thing I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of misinformation out there about CMMC. I pulled this directly from the Microsoft website, and I want you to notice that there are still references here for CMMC levels 3 through 5, CMMC 1.0. Microsoft has not updated their site, but yet this information is standing. So there's lots of misinformation, lots of stale information. So always go back to authoritative sources and ask the vendor if there are questions or ambiguity. All right, last point I'm going to put out here from just some practical tools. Last year at last year's RSA conference, which is arguably the largest cybersecurity conference in the world, definitely in the country, the Cyber AB and the DoD had an information session. They had a fantastic session, And from Kelly Fletcher, who is the Deputy Chief Information Officer of the DoD, and Matt Travis, who's the CEO of Cyber AB. From their mouths, you can hear what the intention, what the program, what their direction is for CMMC. I think understanding that intention is so critical because it paints a really good picture of what the roadmap, what the road looks like in front of us. Lastly, I have an SSP builder and some things that we have available on our website that are available in these QR codes. So I want to take just 1 second and cover a special area of risk. I think especially in this audience, in this community, really bears an underscoring. This came from a multi-year study that was we've done internally that was presented back in 2017 and then again in 2020 alongside MITRE and the Center for Internet Security at RSA. The link that's on here will take you to that talk. And that is the shared areas of exposure between small and mid-market businesses and MSPs. The reason that this is so important is that the better part of 80% of small organizations outsource some or all of their IT functions to MSPs. MSPs are an incredible risk in this ecosystem, and they are very often in scope inside of CMMC. We have done a lot of work in assessment. We do a lot of assessments every year in SMB as well as small government. And the reason I mentioned these two alongside each other is the threat actors that we see in one often pivot to the other. And there are a lot of smaller government organizations, state, local, tribal, territorial governments specifically. Our assessments are showing that threat actors are bouncing back and forth often between SMB and smaller government entities. And there's a copious amount of information in both of them. So this is one of the most vulnerable populations out there for cyber attack and frankly for the terrible downside risk that comes from it. But let's focus for just a second on MSPs. Now, MSPs are organizations that will outsource some or all of an organization's IT functions. Often this is with remote management and monitoring, RMM, where they provide help desk, they provide ancillary support services, monitoring, patching, etc. Most MSPs are small businesses themselves. They fit inside the same risk profile that SMBs do. On average, most are less than 3 million in revenue and have fewer than 11 full-time employees. The typical MSP is what I want to illustrate here. The typical MSP is very heavily reliant on cloud-enabled tools and often has more than 20 third parties inside of their ecosystem. They introduce 20 third parties into your organization, and they may not necessarily disclose who all of those are. And so it turns this scoping from a CMMC and information ecosystem risk into a really big deal. And so to underscore this, I want to also say clouds and CSPs also come and play with the scoping of CMMC. I think it's important that we define what a cloud is. I'm not going to elaborate that for purposes of time here, but these are some characteristics. And as with all things in the government, there's a document for it. So NIST Special Publication 800-145, if you have questions around what a cloud is, that's the place to go to look at it. But understanding what a cloud is and are they in scope or not in scope based on the information that you provide to them is an important piece to understand. Equally, understanding that that MSPs, highly cloud enabled, that they often are then in scope. We see that there are some very serious areas of risk that are shared between smaller organizations and MSPs. This illustrates it in terms of the CIS controls. And I know we are over on time, so I'm going to go really quickly through this. This is available on our website and is linked later on to the full details of this in a white paper. But the important part here is these clouds that MSPs introduce that often are in scope for your CMMC assessment. They introduce other risks, not just for failing a CMMC audit, but actual cybersecurity risk. And this is an increasingly blind area that most organizations don't even know they have an exposure to until it's too late. And that is, simply put, that is a waterfall attack. That is the bad guys attacking the cloud systems or the systems that MSPs introduce into your organization in which to gain access or carry out their objectives. So with that said, I mentioned earlier that you're responsible for a continuous security perimeter. This is the scripture and verse that defines that. So as the organization that is seeking compliance or certification, you're still responsible for the MSPs, the clouds that they introduce, and cloud service providers that you utilize for their compliance with the DFAR 7012 regulation. All right, now to talk very, very tactical around the risk and some of the typifying this risk, specifically focused on MSPs. MSPs are often introduce a risk of boundary control issues. This is an attack vector that's actively being exploited. I just pulled one. This has a Wikipedia page. I mean, this was such a big deal. This attack has a Wikipedia page. And in this instance, a remote management and monitoring platform called Kaseya that MSPs installed in their customers to help them do their job, to help the MSP remotely support and manage their customers. Attackers compromised the software provider, Kaseya, and it flowed down a waterfall attack and ended up encrypting a ransomware attack against north of 1,200 companies. This is a vector that's really actively being exploited. This was actually well-timed, July 2nd, 2021, right before July 4th. A lot of people were out. The bad guys knew what they were doing. These are motivated threat actors. This is not script kiddies. Again, going back to the fact that more and increasingly sophisticated threat actors are targeting the defense industrial base. This is such a big deal that CISA has issued multiple alerts. I don't know about you, but I know when CISA issues an alert, I listen because that means that they're seeing some stuff and they have visibility way beyond what surely what most of us have access to. So back in 2022, CISA issued an alert around this particular attack vector, and then just recently, last week, right, or a week before last, January 25th, they issued an alert about this exact thing. Bad guys targeting the cloud service tools that MSPs are introducing into their customers. It's a big deal. It impacts your CMMC posture, but more importantly, and the reason I'm included here is that it attacks your overall, it impacts your overall cybersecurity posture. So it's something that bears having some attention to it. For purposes of time, I want to just go back to this illustration very quickly, and then we'll move on to a few points for taking action. If we look at the statistics about the approximate number of firms that are small businesses that outsource their IT functions to an MSP, some or all of them, that's represented here. Now, you may not fall into this, right? You may have 100% internally delivered IT services, but what about your subcontractors? What about those that are inside of your information ecosystem? This is a big deal, and it affects businesses at the enterprise level all the way throughout. But the red shaded area here represents the organizations that would use an MSP based on these statistics. So consider that in your application and inside of your ecosystem. So with that, and really coming into a conclusion here, what can you do to take action, getting ready for and taking action toward CMMC certification? So first, familiarize yourself with all this acronym soup. There's a lot of it. There's a copious number of acronyms, way more than I covered in this talk today. Inventory of information assets is so important. What information do you have? Where is it stored and who has access to it? Very important. 3, inventory of your MSPs, your CSPs, and the services that you subscribe to for each of them. Understand if that's going to be in scope or out of scope from a CMMC perspective, based on the information assets that they can store, process, or influence. Store, access, process, or influence. And then lastly, form your CMMC team. This is your A team. These are the people that are going to have 360 knowledge of the business. That involves the executive leadership, legal, internal, and or external, your operations people, your administrative HR people, as well as your IT team. Use the free SSP builder that we have, or one that you find. There's 10 of them that are out there that I know are all of good quality, but use the SSP builder to form the rough draft. It's your framework. It's just the rough blueprint of what your SSP is going to look like, and then start filling in the gaps. Review that, review your SPURS score, revise that as required, and start to collect the information of the SSPs and the compliance status of your third parties. And then lastly, define what your continuous security perimeter is. You know what information assets you have, who has access to those things, and what is and is not CUI. Define that continuous security perimeter, and then identify the deltas in your third parties. If they're inside of that perimeter and they can't comply with DFAR 7012 or other applicable controls, you may either have to encourage them to change their security posture, change what information assets you share with them, or identify alternate providers. There's a lot of that going on right now. And again, lastly, formalize your SSP, work your deltas toward that 110 score. And then at that point, once you really feel like you are at a true 110, that's the point to engage an assessor. Engaging an assessor early is important, but I think there's definitely premature engagement that tends to be rather costly and can be very cumbersome. So with that, if you'd like a copy of this presentation and to fight social engineering, because it always happens, this is a link. You can use that QR code that reaches out directly to me. It doesn't go to our sales team, that comes to me, but include this passphrase. And so that passphrase will let me know that you were here and you're not trying to social engineer this. There's my email address, so please reach out. Equally, if you want some more information, this will take you out to a landing page. We've put a lot of information out on our website around 800-171 and this process. So with that, I know we're a couple minutes over in time, but I can stick around if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them.
We actually didn't have any questions. You did such a great job, and we truly appreciate your passion. Tell you're passionate about what you do.
Thank you. Indeed. Such an important topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks again, Lawrence. I really appreciate all your time today. It was a great presentation. We'll be sending this out to the rest of our group later today. And everybody who attended, we really appreciate your time today. We know it's valuable and we appreciate it. If you need CPE for this webinar, we will be sending out an email right after just to see if anybody needs that. But other than that, man, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for raising this awareness and doing this, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. All right. We look forward to working with you soon, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.